bottle of liquid cement becomes a bottle of liquid plastic. So give it a go. Hello, this is BJ from Hearns Hobbies and welcome to my little tutorial here. I'm going to be talking about this stuff. Now, it's not what you can see on the label. This is actually one of my really old bottles of extra thin cement. And as it's run down, I've actually turned it into my bottle of Sprue Goo, which is basically melted plastic. So if you don't know what Sprue Goo is and how melted plastic is going to change your life, then I'm going to show you a few little examples here. But first I'm going to explain what this stuff is. Okay, so let's look from the top here. Now you can see here, this is my bottle of ancient Sprue Goo. Started off as a bottle of extra thin cement. Now as you use your cement, as it goes low, it can be a bit hard to access the cement down here with the brush. So alternatively, you can buy another bottle, fill it up, continue using it. Great thing to do is, I've just got some sprue, and if you don't know what sprue is, well, that's practically a sprue. But with a sprue, once you used all the parts, you're left with these little offcuts. Okay, so the offcuts, these are the bits that you normally throw away because they're not actually part of the model, they're part of the molding process. But these are great to turn into liquid plastic. And we turn these into liquid plastic by putting this into the liquid cement. Now I'll show you what this looks like. It's not going to look very pretty. So this is just basically melted styrene. You can see there that dollop on the end. Now depending on how much plastic you put into your bottle depends on how thick this particular material is going to be. And it'll probably be ideal to have a couple of bottles so you can have a thick mix and a thin mix. A bit like the same as having a thin glue and a thick glue. You use them in different circumstances. So you normally use this for either getting a better bond where you've got two pieces that don't fit perfectly together. Very handy when you're doing scratch building. Or even with some kits which generally engineering isn't the greatest and you need to fill it in and have something really substantial to hold it together. Okay, so this is, you can see quite a bit of a drop there. So it is quite thick, this one. You can make it thicker. I would probably prefer this to be a little bit thicker. I just added a little bit of more cement to it to thin it down, because eventually as you use it, it will evaporate and it will slowly thicken as you use it. So you can adjust it as you go. So how do we get it to this particular stage? It's probably easier if I show you with something I've prepared a little bit earlier. So you can see a fully melted version there, which has been sitting around for a long time. To get to this stage, it probably took around about a week because I had quite a lot of plastic in it. Now this is what it looks like after 2 hours with a little bit of plastic. Okay, so this was a white styrene, and you might be able to just see some lumps still in there. Okay, so that started off as a fully transparent thin cement, and after putting a few bits of plastic in there, it's actually melted them down. Okay, now if we add more, then it's simply going to thicken up and thicken up over time. Now to prepare this, you don't want to drop the whole thing in there. You can do, it's just going to take a long time before the solvents are going to eat through this. So it's best to cut it up into really small bits, and the smaller bits the better. Okay, so with my side cutters, I'm just cutting this into little discs. Okay, so you see that. So basically you're just making little pellets. And if you can imagine, you can get sprue in different colors. You can even get your clear and make a clear liquid plastic, which you can use for certain areas. You can even use it for glazing as well. But you see how we just cut off these little pellets? They just go straight into here. And then in a little bit of time, these will melt down and become your liquid plastic. Okay, so you can see there, they're probably just getting attacked around the edge, and then give it an hour and they'll be all melted. Okay, so that's basically how you make it. It's just a combination of ratios of the plastic to your liquid cement. Now after a couple of hours when that's all melted, check it, see if it's a consistency you like. If not, either add more sprue or add more cement. So just like that, and then over time as you use it, you keep adjusting it. Okay, so that's how that sort of works. There, very easy to make. All right, now what's it useful for? All right, so let's see. Most useful, I guess, I'll bring these figures over. And now here's a couple of figures that I've been modifying for a build I'm doing. Now these initially were standing figures. Okay, so these are what are commonly known as multi-pose 35th scale figures. The arms, the torso, now this torso is only held on with some blue tack, so you'll see here how it comes separate. Now over here, I see if I can point out that the spacing between the crotch here, so to get this correct seated stance, the legs were actually cut at the knees, sections cut out so they could bend, and then I've used this plastic cement to bond all that together. Now that is acting as, I guess it's like a thick weld, also acts as a filler. But the difference between this stuff and filler is filler normally sits within the void, and it doesn't have a very good bond with the void. So a lot of putties, if I put some regular, say, a lacquer-based putty like Tamir putty in there, or a water-based putty like Vallejo or Deluxe, if I were to bend that, it would just crack off. But with using the plastic, it's bonding greater surface area, and it's actually getting a much better bond. So that's very strong. So that's pretty much as strong as the original plastic would have been. Now if we only use liquid cement, the really thin stuff there, and then fill that up with putty, if I were to bend that, that'll probably break off. Okay, so what else I've done is I've actually filled this gap with the liquid plastic, and after it's set, it feels like plastic as well. So you can cut into it, scrape it, and paint over it, and it'll be exactly the same material. So that's basically how you use it. It's used for filling and for bonding, and it gives a very strong bond. Okay, so once I get this right, I will be using this to, well, the liquid plastic to glue it together as well. So I'll add a big dollop in here because this has been actually sculpted out, and when you sit this on top, it doesn't fit perfectly. Okay, so you need that gap filling capability. Now your other alternative is you can use really thick tube cement. Tube cement tends to string though, which is less controllable, and it doesn't have the same scraping or feel of liquid plastic. When tube cement dries, it's actually quite brittle. They use a different type of filler within it. Okay, so that is one of the major uses. So scratch building, similar to here. So I've actually had the arms cut at the elbows, legs cut again, and over here the back has been glued on as well. So again, this was a standing position, so this is where the torso would have been glued on, but it's actually glued across the front here. So that's been scraped back. You don't get a perfect join, and then you see on the bottom I've actually got a void here, which is where I've been scraping it back, and it's actually gone through. So let me just demonstrate on this section here how when I put this on, now hopefully this is thick enough to actually fill. Now if I apply a dollop there, you see how thick it is? It's got a little ball there. Now you see there, that's actually filled it in. Now that's going to take some time to dry because depending on how much cement you've mixed into it, will depend how long it'll take for that cement to actually evaporate away. So if you've got a really thin mix, then it should dry up pretty quick. If it's thicker, it'll take time for it to actually evaporate through the amount of styrene you have there. So if you do something like that, you'll need to leave that for quite a few hours because it'll take time to set. But once it is set, I'll just leave that sitting there so it doesn't go everywhere. So just like this part here where I've got it on along the legs, if I were to cut that or scrape that, it feels just like regular injected plastic. Now what you're going to find is it will feel slightly softer because the rest of this plastic has been injected at incredible force. Okay, so it's really tightly packed. This stuff hasn't been, so it'll still feel like plastic, but slightly softer. Still hold all its shape as well though, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so that's what you can do with scratch building with figures. So it doesn't have to be just with figures. So imagine if you're, let's see, let's get a bit of sprue here, all right? So generally when you're cutting parts, if we cut that straight with side cutters, all right, we have this part here. Now the ends of the parts which cut with side cutters, depending on your quality of side cutter of course, is going to be rough. Now even if you get really good side cutters, without sanding it all, it's not going to be a very flat joint. Okay, so if we would try to join these two parts together, it's not going to be the strongest because you only got the very top edge of that holding this. So let me just demonstrate here. Let's get a little bit of liquid cement. Put a drop in there. Press it together. Okay, so that will glue, but it's not going to have a lot of strength. Okay, alternatively, if I cut a bit off here, we can use our melted plastic. Actually, let's put a dollop on the end of there. And you can imagine that this is going to sit across the joint much more. Okay, now it's going to take some time for it to actually bond. So this one here is actually taken already. This is going to take longer. Okay, this is probably not the best example. Now this is going to take a while before I can actually show you full strength. Now this one, just say if I move that, see how easily it just comes off? So that was bonded, but it was such a small surface area that it's come off really quickly. Now what we can do is we can put the glue on here to tack it together, and then if we add our liquid plastic and we add it to the edges here, it'll create a fillet which would give it extra strength. So this is basically the same method I use for joining these figures together. Okay, you chop them up and you join them, and then to get the strength, you apply it like that. Okay, so that's quite simplistically. Let's try and find an example where you probably get a better idea of what I mean. So sometimes you got, here's a big fuselage half. Okay, so this is a cockpit section of a 32nd scale Lancaster. See how they're joined in halves like this. Fairly standard, fairly common way of joining with aircraft. Now, where they meet, along here, you'll notice that even if we press it fairly tightly, there's still a very small gap. And this is where you will apply the liquid cement on the inside, here. And this will increase the strength and will also allow you to sand it perfectly. And you won't have to worry about this side getting any ghost seams. Okay, because you'll see here, if I were to try to glue this now, there is actually quite a visible gap there. It's very, very tiny. It's probably like 0.1, even smaller of a mil. Okay, so if I glue this, just apply the glue here. Now that's probably only joining at very sporadic points here, even though we think it's all joined. Now if I look through this profile here, I can see that the gap on the inside is actually even bigger. Okay, so in this particular case, what we'll do, actually that's starting to pull apart already, and that sort of shows you that how little surface area there was just here. Okay, because with larger parts they tend to warp as they come out of the mold, and as we squeeze this part, back part's starting to open, as you can see. So ideally, what will we do? Let me just move this part out of the way. Just see that's starting to take now. Okay, so this is the part we glued on with the Sprue Goo, or the melted plastic. And this is the one which we tacked on with liquid cement and then added some plastic there. Okay, so this is going to get stronger as it dries. It's going to take another hour before you get full strength out of that, but this is giving you an idea of what you can do. Okay, so in the case of something like this, what we're going to do, we're going to get some tape, we'll tape it together, stop the warpage from pulling it all apart. Okay, so I'll put a little bit at the back here. Put some across the front here, hold it all together. Okay, so in this case, let's apply some more of this liquid cement. So this is basically only tacking because the joint isn't the best, there's not a lot of surface area, okay? So if anything, it's only joining like a very wafer thin part on the top there. On the bottom, there's still quite a large gap, okay? And this is where we apply this stuff. And this will add a lot of mechanical strength. Okay, it's going to fill in the gap, but it's also going to weld at the same time. So very different to your regular filler. And you can see how this one is a particular thin mix I've used here, and it's not sitting that high, so it's not going to obstruct too much detail. If you need to sand this after it's set, it won't be that difficult to do. Okay, and it's as simple as that. So there's your plastic, or what, Sprue Goo, liquid plastic, liquid styrene. So this is not a new idea. This is actually a technique that's been used since the beginning of plastic model building. So it would have been something out of the 50s. You'll see something like this in publications where, say, for instance, if you're aware of some of the old companies like Hysterix, even Airfix, I guess. When those particular figures were very popular, they'll talk about using a melted styrene for filling and for gluing. So that's just a couple of examples. So here for adding strength and filling in gaps, and then also here with figures for filling gaps and adding strength. So here I've just filled up a hole. Later, as this is set, I'll be able to trim that as well. And then later on, I'll be able to use that for filling as well, and also basically almost re-sculpting. So I'll try to re-sculpt as much with this as possible before I start using epoxy putties. So I'll be using epoxy putties for redoing some of the wrinkles on the clothing, and then also some of the, I guess, belts and such on the figure. So there you go, simple as that. So let me just go through it. We'll summarize how you make it. You need some thin liquid cement. Okay, you use thicker liquid cement as well. Simply means that it's going to take longer for the plastic to melt down. Now here's the example I had earlier. Okay, so you can see I've dropped in some little pellets of styrene that I've cut up into small pellets, and hasn't been much time now, but you can see how they're already stuck in place, and they started to round off all the edges. So this is already starting to melt. So in a couple of hours or even an hour or so, that'll probably be your liquid plastic. And this is just my classic Tamiya extra thin cement. I've used this for a long time. This went down low, put some styrene into it, and so now this is my dedicated bottle of Sprue Goo. Okay, the handy part of this too is because you got your built-in brush, I just apply it with the brush as well. Okay, so there you go. Hopefully you would like to try this yourself and find the benefits of Sprue Goo or melted plastic, and it's going to enhance your model building and also the integrity of your models multiple times. So that's it. Bottle of liquid cement becomes a bottle of liquid plastic. So give it a go and let me know what you think of it, or if you've got any questions. So just leave them on the comments down below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So thank you for watching.